had just moved into a new apartment complex in a quiet part of town. It was one of those places where everyone keeps to themselves and barely acknowledges each other's existence. Unit 402 was small but cozy, perfect for a fresh start after my divorce. The rent was cheap, the neighbors were quiet, and it had a great view of the city skyline. Little did I know, that apartment would become the setting for my worst nightmare. It started on a Wednesday night. I had just settled into bed with a good book when the power went out. The sudden darkness was unsettling, but I figured it was just a minor blackout. I reached for my phone to use its flashlight, but as I turned it on, I saw something in the corner of the room. It was faint, a shadowy figure standing perfectly still. My heart pounded as I tried to focus on it, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. I chalked it up to my imagination, a trick of the light in my sleep-deprived state. But then I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, but unmistakably real. It sounded like it was coming from the living room. I mustered the courage to get up and investigate, my phone's flashlight leading the way. As I entered the living room, the whispering stopped. The air felt colder, heavy with an unexplainable dread. I scanned the room, but nothing seemed out of place. The power came back on suddenly, startling me. I let out a nervous laugh, trying to convince myself that it was all just a figment of my imagination. I decided to go back to bed and try to get some sleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling uneasy, but shrugged it off as a bad dream. However, the following night, the power went out again at exactly the same time. This time, I was prepared. I had a flashlight and some candles ready. As soon as the lights went out, I lit a candle and waited. The shadowy figure appeared again, this time closer, near the foot of my bed. My breath caught in my throat as I watched it, frozen in place. The whispering started again, clearer this time. It sounded like multiple voices, all speaking in a hushed, urgent tone. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the sound was enough to send chills down my spine. The figure moved closer, and I could see it more clearly now. It was tall, with long, bony fingers and hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through me. I screamed, and the figure vanished once more as the power returned. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and left the apartment, deciding to stay with a friend until I figured out what was going on. I told my friend about the strange occurrences, and she suggested we look up the history of the apartment. What we found was horrifying. Unit 402 had a dark past. Years ago, a man had died there under mysterious circumstances. He was a recluse, rarely seen by the neighbors. When the police finally broke into his apartment, they found strange symbols drawn on the walls and evidence of occult rituals. The official cause of death was never determined, but locals believed he had summoned something dark that still lingered in the apartment. Terrified, I went back to the apartment during the day to collect my things. As I packed, I could feel eyes on me, a presence watching my every move. I hurried, desperate to leave and never return. As I was about to leave, I heard a whisper right next to my ear. "You can't escape." I ran out, leaving the door wide open behind me. I moved in with my friend temporarily and found a new place a few weeks later. I never went back to Unit 402, and I don't think I ever will. Every now and then, I hear whispers in the dark, and I can't shake the feeling that something followed me from that cursed apartment. To this day, I wonder if anyone else has moved into Unit 402, and if they too have encountered the shadowy figure and the whispering voices. There is this abandoned warehouse in the middle of my city. Not in the middle, but in the busy part of the city. The reason nobody has done anything about it is because the warehouse used to be owned by a petroleum company. They used it to store oil before the city expanded. Now there's a flyover running over it, and the property is owned by the city and the railway commission because of the railway line that runs next to it. Anyway, it's just a building that used to be part of a massive complex of warehouses, silos, and a factory. Now only this one building remains. A friend and I like exploring abandoned places, mainly for the experience, and to imagine what it would have been like when the places were active and functioning. So we were looking for places to explore, and I had known about this location. It is quite close to where we live. So I suggested if we could explore the warehouse. My friend jumped at the chance, and we set a date. Saturday morning. We decided to go early in the morning because that area is known for shady things, and the nights weren't safe. It also gets busy during the midday. Anywho, we went at around 7 a.m., walked over there since it's not too far. When we reached the place, it was messy. Garbage piled up in the corner, and the compound wall tagged with graffiti. We had to find a way in. As we walked around, we discovered there was no way in from the street. It was just wall all the way down. We had to get in from the railway track. So we walked around and entered the railway tracks. From the railway tracks, you can see the flyover that runs over it, and an apartment next to the warehouse. This place is like in the middle of all the action, yet is in its own bubble lost to time. On the other side of the tracks is army and railway property. We eventually found a break in the wall that allowed us to enter the place. We had to hop over it, and there was an old broken freezer just lying on the other side. So people have come in here before. When we stepped in, and I kid you not, I felt this overwhelming sense of dread. Yeah, it sounds cliché as hell, but I just felt something was off. I told my friend this, and she just shrugged it off like it was no big deal. She basically said it's probably because we are trespassing, and we could get caught. Inside, there were a lot of overgrown poppy plants and wild weeds just growing out of the cement. We had to trek through this brief bit of foliage, and once we did, we stepped into a compound. The compound was big, but I couldn't sense the size of it because a good amount was covered in overgrown wild foliage. But we could see the warehouse building rising over it in its imposing and dilapidated form. My friend was excited to see this. She pulled out her phone and took some pictures. I looked around, and the feeling was just getting worse. I then walked further into the compound, and that's when I saw it. On the ground, bones, like animal bones. It was a whole field of bones just strewn about on the ground. I freaked. I'm a guy who does not believe in superstition, but I do think curses, black magic, and the supernatural are a possibility. So when I saw a literal compound full of bones, like skulls, femurs, teeth, and whole animal skeletons, compounded with the feeling of intense dread and doom, a feeling that I get when someone close to me is about to die, I wanted to get out of there. I told my friend that we needed to leave. She still wanted to explore. She was walking all over the bones and kicking them around. I was watching this and getting more scared. I asked her why there would be a whole bunch of bones here. She said she didn't know and didn't really care. Now she doesn't really believe in anything supernatural. Ghosts don't exist in her mind, and curses and black magic are just psychological sleights of hand. To be honest, I kind of think the same way. But also, I don't dismiss the idea that someone can get cursed, or a place can be cursed. So for her, this is just fun. For me, terrifying. I was carefully watching my step, trying my best to avoid the bones. She was just trampling all over them. I didn't want to explore further, and she did. I somehow convinced her that we needed to leave, and she finally conceded, realizing I was actually scared for my life. After we left, and on the walk back, I realized that the feeling I got had not gone. I told her this. She said I was probably paranoid. Funny thing, I never mentioned this earlier because I personally think it's a coincidence, but there is always that nagging feeling at the back of my mind that it's not. Now, for as long as I can remember, on some level, I have had the ability to sense when someone is about to die. Like, they can be healthy, young, old, or sick. But if they are about to die, I can sense it, many times even before they realize. Like, it only comes when I'm close to the person physically or interacting with them, but I have to be around and in some kind of contact with them. Basically, when I'm with them, I can't get the thought of death out of my head. That was the feeling I was getting when I was with her after we left. Mind you, I never got that feeling before we entered the place. No, I instantly got it after we left. I told her this, like I just told her I thought we might be cursed, and that one of us is going to die. She, as usual, made a joke out of it, and then semi-seriously said that I wasn't invited to her funeral if she died. But I told her that I was not going back there. She agreed, and we went back home. Cut to a few days later, we were planning to watch a movie when she suddenly canceled on me because she fell sick. That feeling had not gone. In fact, it came back stronger. She jokingly mentioned it was the curse. I just laughed, but at the back of my mind, I was wondering if it actually was. Then, a few days after that, I find out she has been admitted to the hospital. The condition was getting worse. The rest I found out from her parents, because she had slipped into a coma shortly after that. The doctors were trying everything, and they couldn't figure out why she wasn't recovering. Then, one night, I was just sitting on my computer, watching videos when I got the feeling again. Stronger than ever this time. Like, stronger than I had ever got before. Funny thing, no one was around me, and I wasn't talking to anyone either. The only thought I had was someone is going to die. I couldn't focus on what I was doing, just the thought of death. I thought I was going to die, and the feeling got worse and worse. I tried to fight the feeling and shake it off, but it wouldn't go. Then suddenly, it stopped, and all I could feel was sadness. I went to sleep. The next morning, I found out from my parents that my friend had passed away last night in the hospital. I have never been in that warehouse again. A little over a decade ago, I had gotten married, and we secured our apartment after my cousin moved out of state. She said that the place was nice and never mentioned anything else. The layout was pretty simple. It was a duplex with a very large living room attached to the kitchen-dining room combination, with the back door at the kitchen. Where the living room met the kitchen, you could go right, and there was a hallway that led to the smaller back bedroom immediately to the left, on the opposite wall of the kitchen. There was a small room for laundry and such, then the bathroom, followed by the bigger bedroom at the front of the house. When we first moved in, I had my PC at the front of the house, next to the window, so I could see anyone coming to our home, know when the mail had arrived, etc. While there, I would always feel cold, also with a feeling of being watched. It didn't matter how much clothing I wore, that cold feeling would not fade. After a week of being there, I opted to move my PC to the other side of the room, next to the opening to the hallway, where I could see into the back room very easily. During this time, I could never sleep. I always felt like someone was there in the room, and this level of discomfort was unshakable. I started to feel extreme levels of paranoia and constantly felt nauseous. I told my wife, now ex-wife, that I didn't like the back bedroom and that I wanted to move the bed to the front bedroom instead. She was confused about why I felt that way, but I just explained myself, and she agreed because she was now on edge. Her reaction to me telling her this came off as odd. While streaming, now a retired streamer, Minecraft one night, my wife was visiting her family in Missouri, but was watching, and for a moment, I thought I had seen someone in the back bedroom. I froze completely because I was certain I saw a black silhouette. I collected myself, thought that being alone was getting to me, and I was just seeing things. So I got up, closed the door, and then went back to my business. A few days later, while on the toilet, I heard someone walking up and down the hallway. I froze in place again, but was frustrated, and with a very authoritative voice said, "Stop it," and the footsteps stopped. Once she was back, she noticed that I was closing any door when I slept, and would often lock the door, like this was going to do anything, and I would only sleep during the day. My paranoia had gotten bad, but I knew something was wrong. One night after I cooked and we did the dishes together, we were watching a movie and then heard the dishes moving around at times. Out of fear of bugs or rats, even though this wasn't a bad place to live, I just figured I didn't set the dishes up properly and they fell over. This started to become a regular thing, even when dishes weren't out. So now, feeling this level of paranoia that the place is haunted, I tell my wife directly that when the lease is up, we are out. She then tells me that it may continue even if we moved places. She then tells me that her stepdad was treated poorly by her mom, and he was like a real dad to her. To spare the full details, he would sleep under the porch because she wouldn't let him in the house, and my wife's connection with him was strong. He ultimately passed away, and she did something that blew my mind. She had experimented with things before we were together to try and get him to speak to me. I don't know everything that she did, but I know it involved a pentagram on the ground and other things. So now I am in this state of mind where, is it him? Does he not like me? Did she summon some sort of demon and not him? She never told me this during our dating phase, and apparently, she never was going to tell me until this happened. Stupefied was an understatement. We continued to live there, and I tried my best to deal with it while counting the days down to move out. I had eventually become so used to things that I just didn't pay too much attention to it anymore, and people would make jokes about our ghost roommate. Even on the day we moved out, my cousin was helping us, and she said, "Say bye to the ghost." And while I was not there for this moment, they, cousin and wife, both swear they saw 2 dishes move. After we moved out, I finally found out the landlord's husband died there a decade and some change before we lived there. Years ago, my boyfriend and I both started having sleep paralysis episodes 5 nights a week. Neither of us had ever experienced them before that. He felt like something was in the room, and sometimes that he couldn't breathe, but I never did. For me, it was only this overwhelming dread and fear of falling back to sleep. I was awake and could see the room lit by the TV or nightlight. I could move my eyes, but that was it. I couldn't speak, scream, or reach for my boyfriend to wake me. I would try to will myself to roll off the bed to wake myself, but never could. We realized that we both would try to yell for the other to snap us out of it, and eventually figured out that although we couldn't speak or yell, we could make this grunting-type breath sound that would occasionally work to wake the other, so we could help each other out. It always happened to us on the same nights, but never at the same time. At the time, we were living in a one-bedroom apartment, so we had a bunk bed to save space. My son, who was 5 at the time, slept on the top bunk. He started telling us that he would see shadow people standing in the room at night. He described them as people who were the shape of Nana and Papa, but all dark, with no faces. My parents are alive, so I took it to mean maybe one was tall and one was short. I don't know. It was all so strange. I had no idea that shadow people were actually a thing until years later when I heard about it on a TV show. My son woke us up crying one night, telling us that one of them had pushed his face into his pillow so hard that he couldn't breathe. I was clearing out old stuff one day and had a cardboard box of teacups and other glass decor sitting on the floor about 6 feet away from the ladder on the bunk bed where my son would climb up. We woke up that night to a bang and him screaming. He was on the floor inches from the box of glass stuff. He was sobbing that something picked him up and threw him off the bed. He couldn't jump from the top because the ceiling was too low. He probably could from the ladder, but we'd always wake up when he'd climb down because the whole thing was metal and it would squeak and shake like crazy. After that, we started really freaking out because the accumulating events had only started about a month prior and none of it made sense. My boyfriend finally figured it out one day. We had a big plastic 4-shelf unit with tons of board games. Sitting on the top shelf between Clue and Mousetrap was a Ouija board that I had picked up at a yard sale with a bunch of other board games about a month earlier. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I just bought them all, stuck them on the shelf, and forgot all about it. My boyfriend was so upset. I immediately took it out to the dumpster. After it was gone, neither of us ever had sleep paralysis again, and my son never spoke of shadow people or had weird stuff happen to him ever again. I never really believed in demons or such things, although I did have a handful of scary, unexplainable things happen to me as a kid in the 150 years old house I grew up in. But stuff like Ouija boards never really scared me, although I don't think I ever really used one either. After what happened to us, I fully believe that there are dark energies, or forces, or something that can attach to things or places. And yeah, a Ouija board is very cliché for that type of thing. But I'm thinking there's a reason that it became so cliché. And unfortunately, we had to find out the hard way. For the record, the Ouija board wasn't antique or anything special. It was a Parker Brothers board, I believe, and looked like it was from the 80s or early 90s. It was from a sweet older woman's home who had a bunch of 80s or 90s toys in her yard sale. Definitely didn't seem like the home of a Satanist or anything. I can't claim to know if it was a ghost, spirit, demon, or multiple things. I just know what happened, that it started after I brought that board into my home and stopped after it was gone. We never used it. I never even opened the box until the day I threw it out. My scientific mind is still trying to make sense of it, but deep down, I know I never will. I'm one of those people that tear up a bit when talking about something truly terrifying. I'm tearing up while remembering this experience now. I had a close and dear friend years ago. We went to high school together and instantly became close as we enjoyed the same everything. Movies, games, activities, and so on. This friend had a beautiful cottage in Muskoka, which was about an hour and a bit from the area we lived in. They would talk about it a bunch, saying how awesome it was to go there in the summer, as it was right on a river and was perfect for swimming and paddleboarding. They also said it was kind of haunted, just passing comments about how it was spooky, how they'd hear things at night, how it was probably home to a ghost. They always said this jokingly, like it was no big deal, so we'd usually laugh at the idea that their beautiful and pretty much newly built cottage was actually a ghost house. Fast forward a couple of years, and they invite me out to their cottage in October. The family was going up, and my friend asked if I could come with. I was super excited to go because I'd never really been to Muskoka and knew how beautiful it could be, especially in the fall, and also how often my friend mentioned the fun they'd have at the cottage. I want to now preface what comes next with the fact that I have never had any paranormal stuff happen to me, ever. I don't disbelieve it, and never have, but I've never been in a position where I'd feel like, okay, this is definitely paranormal stuff, until this event. We get to where the cottage is located in this small community called Matthiasville. As soon as we enter, I get this weird feeling, like a shadow had been cast. It was a beautiful sunny day, with good vibes all the way up until we crossed the bridge that led into the community. The weather turned overcast, but it wasn't that. There was a heavy and weird energy. We're driving along the riverside for some time. I tell my friend about the energy feeling, to which they said, "Oh, I know, it's weird, right? Like, heavy." Things lighten up, however, when we arrive at the cottage. This place was absolutely beautiful. New build, 3 floors, big deck on the 2nd floor, and tons of windows that went floor to ceiling. It overlooked the river, and it had a forest trail at the back. The trail was way too thick with brush and wood to even try navigating, so we spent a lot of our time out by the water and on the big deck, chilling. We'd drive into the nearest town, Bracebridge, for some outings, and at night, we dedicated our time to beating the COD, World at War campaign, split screen. It was an absolute blast. We went for a long day walk, too, and saw some of the interesting points of Matthiasville, a big dam, and beyond that, a strange and small graveyard that was situated on a slight hill at the very end of the community. All the graves were old, and some of them were unmarked. Others, you couldn't even make out what the stones had written on them. It was eerie, but nothing out of the ordinary happened for the first 2 nights we spent there. On the 3rd and last night, the dad had to head home early for some work stuff, so it was just my friend, their mom, and myself hanging out for the night. The mom was sleeping in the loft, way up on the 3rd floor, and we made the basement floor our home for the weekend. We decided to watch a movie and eat snacks, but when that was finished, I suggested we go out for a night walk, since it was a clear night with a big moon out. I loved going for night strolls, plus we hadn't really been out and about after dark, and the place was pretty beautiful at night too. My friend was really against this. They said the place was spooky enough during the day, let alone at night. I managed to convince them, and out we went. We were walking along the road that went along the river, towards the dam and the end of the community where the graveyard was. We made it about a quarter way when my friend stopped dead in their tracks. I looked back to see what was up, and they were just standing there. They looked defensive. I asked what was up, and they said, "We need to go back, right now. This feels weird, and I don't like it at all." I asked if they were scared, like if they heard an animal or something. As soon as I asked that, We heard a deep and loud cracking and snapping of wood in the dense forest above us, on a rocky ridge that was beside the road, opposite the river. I looked up to where we heard it, and it felt like everything hushed. Crickets and all other nighttime sounds seemed to have just stopped. My friend quietly said my name. I looked back at them, and then suddenly, the bushes and shrubs underneath the ridge on the side of the road exploded, as if something huge jumped in them and thrashed around. This made us bolt, and I remember just saying, "Run," as I followed behind my friend. We ran nonstop straight to the basement door of the cottage. We got there in minutes, but it felt like seconds. We ran straight into the basement bedroom and both hopped into the bed. I remember saying it was likely a coyote or a raccoon or something. As soon as I said those words, a creaking started forming up above us in the living area of the first floor. The creaking soon turned into slow, heavy footsteps, back and forth, and loud as if someone was wearing work boots or something. I remember my friend through tears saying, "Does that sound like a coyote to you?" I cannot even describe the absolute feeling of dread that washed over me, like there is something up there, taunting us. We lay in complete silence for what felt like hours. We got into the bed at around 3 a.m. after our walk, which turned into a run, and the footsteps didn't stop for an hour or so. I remember finally falling asleep at 6 a.m. When we woke up, the first thing we did was, of course, ask the mom if she had been awake last night around 3 a.m. She wasn't. She hadn't even gotten up once to use the bathroom, she said. Even if she did, we would have heard her door open, and then the footsteps down the loft stairs. Everything was open concept on the first floor, so it was easy to hear things going on. We packed up and left. My friend's parents sold the cottage a couple of years later. I don't think any of them went back once after that weekend. I was curious about the area afterward, so I did some Googling and learned that there was once a sawmill or something like that, and a tragic accident happened. I believe the owner's son drowned or had a bad accident in the mill, something tragic like that. I want to say that could be a factor here, but who knows? All I know is that night, I heard heavy, clear, and loud footsteps pacing around above us on the first floor. That was my first and only paranormal experience, and I'll never forget it. About a week after moving into this cold, dark 70s prefab council flat, I spent my first night alone, still getting used to the place. I decided to watch some scary YouTube videos to pass the time, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. Even Bella, the resident 20-year-old staffy, lying next to me and snoring loudly, couldn't ease my nerves. As I waited for an ad to load, I heard a muffled noise coming from the hallway, like someone was creeping around trying to be quiet. Curiosity got the better of me, so I got up and cautiously opened the door. But there was nothing there. I looked down the hallway, and it was empty. Just as I was about to close the door, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. It was a short figure dressed in robes like an old-fashioned monk, slowly making their way up the stairs toward me. I closed the door with a chill running all through my body and looked at Bella, still fast asleep. I wanted to escape through the window and abandon my belongings, but being on the second floor made it impossible. So I took a deep breath and opened the door again, hoping it was just my imagination. To my horror, the figure had cleared the darkness of the stairs and reached the little window at the top. In the dim light, I could now make out more details. He was old, with thick greenish wrinkled skin, hunched over with a black pointed hood over his head. He looked sad and lost, scanning the floor as if searching for something. Feeling a sudden wave of fear wash over me, I closed the door again and fumbled for my phone. But it was off, and I couldn't understand why. It had always been reliable, but like any device in this building, it now regularly shuts itself down even when fully charged. Before my phone could boot up, I heard the footsteps again, still slow, but a bit louder now and closer. I looked around the room in a panic, trying to figure out what to do. Suddenly, Bella woke up and snapped me out of it, screaming loudly. My heart was pounding. The footsteps seemed to stop, right outside the door. I could feel the presence of the old man just outside, as if he was standing there, listening. I focused on calming Bella down and sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to collect myself. I didn't hear him leave, and nothing else happened that night. But this flat continues to let us know we're not alone. I've even caught similar hooded figures watching us from the hallway on my phone's camera, but nothing as clear and real as my first encounter that night. Me and my family used to live in a 2-floored house. The second floor was made of wood, while the first floor had been cemented down. However, I didn't quite understand at first why it was built this way. This was abroad. As a 7-year-old, I didn't pay much mind to it. At the time, it had only been me, my older sister, and a maid, since my parents were both working and would often come home late at night. We had spent most of the day downstairs playing with toys when my older sister asked me to go with her to the second floor. We had never been up there because our parents had given specific instructions not to venture upstairs without them. But knowing my stubborn sister and her curiosity, she would go up there with or without me. I was reluctant at first, since I was the scaredy cat out of both of us, but she eventually persuaded me. Our maid was busy washing dishes at the time and didn't notice that we had left the living room to head up to the second floor. As we ascended, the floors were already creaking, and you could smell that it was old. When we saw the second floor, it looked like time had stopped, and we were in a different period. The second floor seemed untouched. There was a rocking chair to the side of the room next to a window, a crib a few feet away, and a small cabinet. From the looks of it, it had obviously been a nursery. We started to look around as my sister walked over to try the rocking chair and then checked the crib. A few minutes had passed, and I noticed my sister hadn't moved from where she stood. I walked up to her to see what was going on. She had been staring at what seemed like a large brown stain in the middle of the crib. As she went in to touch it, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck begin to stand up. I felt a surge of panic and grabbed my sister by the collar, dragging her right out of there. I didn't know what it was that made me make a run for it while dragging my sister with me, but something about the crib made me feel incredibly off, and it only heightened when my sister went to touch it. That night, as we ate dinner, I confessed to my parents that we had explored the second floor despite being told not to, and we were scolded. After everything had calmed down, I asked my mom why we were prohibited from being up there, since we were only going to live in the house for a couple of months before moving to our permanent home. We asked the owner the following day over the phone. Turns out, the owner of the house had lost her daughter and grandchild in the same house on the second floor. She had come home to her psychotic husband, who had smothered their baby with a blanket because she wouldn't stop crying. As her daughter went to get her husband out of the way to grab her baby, he had been caught off guard and elbowed her in the face, causing her to hit her head hard onto the floor. Her daughter and grandchild didn't survive the incident, and the husband was put in jail. The owner hadn't moved anything onto the second floor since the incident, saying she felt something there that felt angry since her daughter and grandchild's death. She had wanted to get the house renovated and have the second floor destroyed to turn it into a one-floor home to hopefully be able to rent it out, which is why she had hired my parents to temporarily live here, but had strict instructions not to go to the second floor and wouldn't disclose what happened as it drove people away. Needless to say, we left that house earlier than the agreed stay and haven't been back since. At my university, there's a castle just off campus that is home to a secret society. The secret society goes back to the 1800s, and obviously everything they do is kept under serious wraps. On Halloween a couple of years ago, some friends and I went to this castle because we thought it would be fun to go by the creepy castle on Halloween. I had done some research beforehand on the secret society, and there were many articles tying them to demonic and weird stuff, so I thought it would be perfect for Halloween. Anyways, the road to the castle is at the end of a residential street, and you have to walk on a gravel path into the woods to get to it. As we were walking up to the castle, we heard a woman let out the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. At that moment, we all ran back to the residential road. Most of the people we were with decided to head back to campus because they were seriously freaked out, but a few of us stayed. We walked back over to the castle, and this time, we noticed people standing on top of the castle with black hooded robes. Once we noticed them, they immediately started throwing rocks at us. At that point, we decided to leave, but as we made our way down the path, we heard what sounded like Latin chanting coming from the castle. When we made it back to the actual road, we saw some other students who came from the woods behind the castle. They mentioned that they also heard the woman scream, and that they were also just as freaked out as us. As we're talking, we hear the sound of a little boy yelling, "Help!" And then again, "Someone please help!" It was coming from the direction of the castle, so we decided to go back, because obviously this kid needed help. When we got there, we noticed that the number of hooded figures had doubled, and they were all looking at us from the roof of the castle. We stood there for a few minutes, just staring at them, but we decided it was best to leave because they had already shown hostility. This experience honestly shook me, but I thought maybe it's just a Halloween prank. But the more I started thinking about it, I realized I wasn't so sure. We were out there for about 2 hours, and our group and the other group of students were the only ones out there that whole time. Why would they come up with some elaborate scheme for only 10 people? And how could I explain the screaming woman and kid if it was just a prank? I know it sounds far-fetched, but I think something really happened that night. So this takes place back in 2005, while I was serving at the U.S. Embassy in the Ivory Coast, West Africa. One morning, after working my night shift at the embassy, I returned home to the Marine House. The U.S. Marines lived in a local residence bought and paid for by the U.S. Embassy. It was a 3-story home in what locals would consider an upscale neighborhood by Ivorian standards. The home was fairly large and had a pool, gym, laundry room, and driver's room on the first floor. It housed 5 U.S. Marines who were tasked with protecting the U.S. Embassy and its personnel. On this morning, I was pretty tired. I had just arrived in the country and was still getting used to the night shift work, lots of Red Bulls. I walked up to my room, which was on the 3rd story of the house. It was a medium-sized room with an attached bathroom and one large window fitted with heavy curtains to keep the daylight out so we could sleep during the day. I was crashing hard from all the Red Bulls. I managed to take my uniform off and get straight into bed. It wasn't long before I reached that state of mind where you're half asleep and half awake. I believe I was at the point where I started dreaming when some sort of sixth sense told me, "You have to wake up." I remember opening my eyes and staring at the opposite wall at the foot of my bed. The room was dark, and I was still half asleep as I scanned from the left side of my room to the right. I recall my eyes concentrating on the daylight that was shooting down the side of the wall towards the corners of my room. As my eyes reached the far right corner, I stopped and focused on a dark spot in the corner of the room. I couldn't make out what it was, but the light abruptly stopped before hitting the corner of the room. As I stared at this dark spot, I realized it was a silhouette of a person. It was tall, and I could make out the outline of shoulders and a head. My first instinct was that I was dreaming, but after a few seconds, my vision cleared up, and the silhouette was still standing there. As I focused harder on it, I realized it wasn't disappearing, and the realization that something was standing there hit me. I had a quick flash thought of, "What is that?" when all of a sudden, this shadow figure with red eyes that I could see clearly now rushed forward and started choking me. Still to this day, I remember the grip it had and the flash of heat I felt run down the back of my neck all the way down to my feet. I closed my eyes tightly and was paralyzed. I couldn't move. The level of fear that struck me was immense. After about 10 seconds, I felt the grip letting go, and as soon as I could move, my first action was to reach for my K-bar knife I kept on top of my nightstand. I quickly stood up, ready to defend myself against whatever was in my room. The next couple of seconds were me tearing my curtains open and clearing the room and restroom, repeating, "What the heck? What the heck? Jesus Christ, what the heck?" My room was completely empty. I went from attack mode to quickly trying to convince myself it was just a side effect of this medication I was on. One of the cons of working in an African post was that we were ordered to take mefloquine, an anti-malaria medication, by our command. One of the side effects clearly stated was the possibility of night terrors. Regardless, I couldn't stay in that room. I ended up falling asleep in the common area with the TV turned on. Fast forward 5 months, and we, the Marines, moved out of that home and into the new embassy compound that had just been constructed. One night, a fellow Marine and I decided to have a movie night and watch The Exorcism of Emily Rose, a creepy movie. When it was done, I walked into the kitchen and ran into Sammy, our butler. Sammy was in charge of doing our laundry and prepping our meals throughout the week. He was amazing. When he wasn't working for us, he spent his time as a Catholic priest at a local church. With the movie fresh in my mind, I asked him, "Sammy, if we got possessed by the devil, could you perform an exorcism?" Sammy replied, "Of course, sir. I do them quite often. Many bad spirits here in Côte d'Ivoire." "Seriously, Sammy?" "Yes, sir. Many evil here." "When we moved in, did you bless our new house?" "Yes, of course, sir. This is a very good home." He paused. "Not like the old house. That was a very bad house." Instantly, I went cold and asked him to explain. "The old house was possessed by 3 demonic spirits," he said. He then went on to tell me that one morning, while he was doing our laundry in the basement of our old home, he looked into the Marine gym and saw 3 shadow figures with red eyes standing side by side in the corner of the room. He grabbed his crucifix and began to pray before they vanished. He then instructed me to go speak with Joey, one of our Ivorian Marine drivers. I hauled ass to find Joey, Joey was a 49-year-old father of 8 who had worked for 15 years as the embassy marine driver. Joey told me that one night, after dropping off one of the Marines, he returned to the driver's room where he tried to get some sleep. He was awakened by something whispering his name. When he opened his eyes, something grabbed him and started choking him. He said he swung his arms wildly, but couldn't hit the thing that was choking him. When it finally released him, he ran out of the driver's room, hopped into the armored suburban marine vehicle, and drove to the U.S. Embassy, where he remained the rest of the night. He never again stepped foot in the driver's room. He told me that sometime later, our gardener accidentally dug up a juju box with bones and voodoo witchcraft trinkets inside. Apparently, somebody had cursed the property, according to him. As if the story couldn't get weirder, I headed inside the U.S. Embassy later that day to speak with my gunnery sergeant about some work. Our conversation turned to what I had just learned about our old house. Gunny had this look on his face, reached up to his logbooks, pulled out an incident report binder from a few years prior, and pulled out a report where a former Marine at the post had reported an intruder in his room that had choked him and disappeared. He slept in the room I slept in. The Marine was so convinced it happened that an official U.S. Embassy report had to be filed. I've been a teacher for 10 years and spent the first 5 years of my career teaching in a Catholic school. A good 20 years before I started there, one of the Dominican sisters, an elderly woman who taught theology classes, passed away of natural causes in her classroom one evening and was found the next morning by the custodians. Sister Marie was well known and loved. She had a page dedicated to her in the yearbook that year. Anyway, if you've never been a first-year teacher, it's freaking hard. There was never enough time during the day to get things done, and I ended up spending many evenings at my desk trying to get it all done. There were times when I was there until 8 or 9, long after the building was empty. A couple of months in, around the start of the second 9 weeks, I was sitting in my classroom grading papers after everyone else had gone. I got a weird fuzzy feeling, not entirely unpleasant, and a rosary that I had hanging on a hook near my desk moved back and forth just a bit. The air wasn't on, and there was no draft. I thought it odd, but chalked it up to being tired and a little on edge due to stress. Another night, the same thing happened, and a little later, one of the big fire doors in the hallway came unlatched and slammed shut. Another time, I got that same fuzzy feeling, and the motion-activated lights in the hallway came on. Those things happened a good bit. Eventually, I started going home earlier around the middle of my second year, and never had it happen again. I looked all over the place, thinking there was someone else in the building. Yeah, probably a dumb idea in hindsight, but I was 24 and invincible. I never could find anyone, and my car was the only one in the lot. Anyway, I never felt scared or creeped out like a lot of folks describe when encountering ghosts, but I also never could find a good explanation. I was born in a little town in Canada where it snowed a lot. For this reason, my parents decided to move to a cabin in a forest a few miles away from town. They took me and my siblings, 3 brothers, 2 sisters, and a dog. I, being the second oldest, didn't really like the idea of living in the woods. My parents assured me it would be wonderful, just us out here. It took us about 2 weeks to fully get settled in. One day, as I was playing with my youngest brother, he asked me if I could read him a book. I said, "Sure, buddy. Go ahead and pick one out." His smile could have lit up the entire room. He quickly shuffled over to his bookshelf. Despite being 6 years old, he ignored all the picture books and went straight for a black pop-up book called The Man from the Window. I don't remember ever seeing this book before, but I assumed our mom had gotten it for him. So, I opened it up and began reading. The man from the window is sad. He couldn't find friends, so now he's mad. Late at night, when there is no light, the man from the window will wrap you up tight. No need to scream or fight, because the man from the window has you all right. Be careful when you hear a tap, tap, tap. The pop-ups in this book were disturbing. They showed the man from the window stuffing a child into a bag, reminiscent of how Krampus would do it. My brother seemed to enjoy the book and begged me to read it again. I declined, and just then heard a tapping sound from the window. I crept over, my hair standing up on my neck, and opened the window. It was daytime, and I could see everything. Just then, a snowball hit me in the face. "Stop being a wimp and come have a snowball fight," my brother Justin shouted. I quickly bundled up in winter clothing, and we headed outside. It was already 3 o'clock, so we only had about an hour and a half until sunset. We played until the sun dipped below the trees around 4:45, and then headed inside. After taking off our gear and settling down in the living room, about an hour later, our parents called us in for dinner. Everyone sat down, and our father began to say grace. "Dear Father, please bless this house." Just as he said that, the lights shut off momentarily before coming back on. My father quickly finished, and we began eating. Later, as I lay in bed, I had a hard time falling asleep. My mom assured me it was likely due to the new environment. Outside my window, the tree swayed in the wind, tapping against the glass. I couldn't shake thoughts of the man from the window and how disturbing that book was. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep. I woke up to my oldest brother violently shaking me. "Get up!" he yelled. I ran outside to see what was happening, and there, lying about 2 feet away from our porch, was our dog. Except, it was missing 2 legs and its head. Our dad rushed everyone inside and told us to stay calm. He called a co-worker, and they took the dog to bury it. "What happened to Otis?" my brother screamed. After an agonizing wait, my dad returned and explained that a pack of wolves might have attacked Otis while he was outside last night. Everyone accepted this explanation, and an awkward silence filled the dinner table that night. No grace was said, and conversation was minimal. After about 15 minutes, everyone went to bed. I was heartbroken over Otis's death. Maybe I could have heard Otis scratching at the door if I hadn't been so preoccupied with the man from the window, I thought to myself. Eventually, I calmed down, rationalizing that Otis's death was a result of nature. 3 weeks passed since Otis's death, and life seemed to return to normal. We laughed and had fun together. That night, we decided to watch a movie and stayed up late until around 11 p.m. before heading to bed. As I sat there thinking, I heard a tap, tap, tap. At first, I ignored it, but then I heard it again, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. I looked towards my window, but saw nothing. I tried to go back to sleep, but then I heard the tapping again, this time in the hallway. I froze, unsure of what to do, feeling terrified. Slowly, I approached my bedroom door and cracked it open. Peering out, I saw a tall, gray figure standing at least 7 feet tall, with a huge, unsettling smile. It was holding a bag filled with something. The figure and I locked eyes for what felt like an eternity before it said, "Once I grow tired of these companions, just as I did with that dog, I'll return for you. I didn't sleep at all that night, hoping it was just a dream, but it wasn't. When I finally mustered the courage to leave my room, there was no one else in the house. I checked all my family members' rooms, finding their doors wide open and their beds looking as though they had just been vacated. I never saw my parents again, nor did I encounter the man from the window. I called my uncle and aunt that day, but they dismissed my story as nonsense. I moved out of that house shortly afterward and now live in Ohio. Whenever I hear a tap, 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 I brace myself for what might come next. Thanks for watching our video. Have you ever had a really scary experience? We want to hear about it. You can tell us in 2 ways. Option 1 is, write down what happened and email it to us. The email address is in the description below. We're excited to read your story and learn all about what happened. And the second option is, record your story using your phone's recording feature. Make sure the sound is good, with no background noise. We want to make sure everyone can hear your scary story clearly. Pick whichever option works best for you, and let's explore your spooky experiences together. We're looking forward to hearing from you. And if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel.